Hey guys, welcome back. So for this one, we are getting into Jonathan Hickman's Ultimate Spider-Man, which to me, this has got to be one of the best Spider-Man origins that I've ever read. And I'll talk about why I feel that way towards the end of this first issue. But if you enjoyed these videos, make sure to drop a like, be sure to subscribe so you can catch the spills every week, and don't forget to hit that bell up top to get all notifications so we can squat up in the comments for the first hour. Alright, so going into Ultimate Spider-Man issue 1, this continues the story that we were shown at the end of Ultimate Invasion issue 1 in the epilogue titled Great Artist Steal, where back at the time we saw the Maker pay the young teenage Peter Parker a visit at the moment where he was supposed to become Spider-Man, when the Maker stopped this from happening by taking the spider just before it could bite Peter. And later on throughout Ultimate Invasion, we discovered that this was one of many instances where the Maker altered the events on this world so that he could craft it into a new world of his choosing. So aside from him stopping Peter from becoming Spider-Man, the Maker also did this to a number of other heroes by either stealing artifacts that would become pivotal to them becoming a hero. Some he captured, some he killed. Then you got some like Steve Rogers who he couldn't even find. And there were others that the Maker influenced that would become his version of the Illuminati to keep this new world in check. But if you need to get caught up to the events building up to Ultimate Spider-Man issue 1, I have a link in the description for the Ultimate Invasion full story as well as Ultimate Universe issue 1, in case you're just tuning in and you need a better understanding of how we got here. Because the radioactive spider that the Maker stole from Peter, that was just one of well over 1,000 relics that the Maker had taken from others who were supposed to become heroes. And heading into this story, only about 100 of those relics have been recovered. So just keep that in mind as the events on this world continue to unfold. Because now when we come back just after the events of Ultimate Universe, we continue with Peter Parker, where for him, this is 20 years later from that moment where we saw the Maker stop him from becoming Spider-Man. And over those 20 years, he's just gone on to live a regular life and become a grown-ass man. Because eventually him and MJ got married, they have 2 kids, Richard and May Parker, and on the surface you could say what we're seeing here is just a regular January morning for Peter. But there's actually a few other subtle things going on here that I want to point out. Because as he tells the kids good morning and he gives little May a kiss on the forehead, he sets his bag down next to her. And the kids let him know Mom made some extra bacon, she brewed his coffee, and Peter's just like, oh, thank God for Mom. But as MJ walks into the room, she points out that Peter's looking a little rough because she noticed that he didn't come to bed last night. So he tells her that he didn't really sleep. So she's like, you didn't sleep or you couldn't sleep? So Peter tells her, yeah, it was a bit of both. And what I want to point out here is that there's 2 reasons that we'll talk more about in a little bit, but there's 2 things that are on Peter's mind that pretty much kept him up all night that'll become very significant on this day for him. And the first one's pretty obvious because it has to do with somewhere the family needs to go later today, and part of the second one, curious little May's pulling out of Peter's bag while Mom and Dad are talking. So Peter grabs this orb, which appears to be just a shiny ball to May, while letting her know that it's not a toy. And her reaction is just adorable. But again, through the course of this, we'll talk about how these 2 things are going to play a huge role on one of the biggest days of Peter's life. So from here, Peter tells MJ that he's got to run, he's got to head into the office, so they'll talk later about what kept him up all night. And after this, we follow Peter to the Daily Bugle as he walks in greeting Betty, who's Betty Brant, I assume, as J. Jonah Jameson comes storming in, yelling, Parker. But when Jameson sees Peter, he's just like, oh hey there. And Peter starts to respond, but Jameson's just like, no time for chit chat, as he walks past Peter and continues to yell, Parker. Because as it turns out, Jameson is talking to Ben Parker, who is the managing editor at the Daily Bugle. So seeing this, it's just like, wow, not only is Uncle Ben alive, but he's managing editor at the Bugle. And him and Jameson are really close, because when Jameson steps into Ben's office, Uncle Ben tells him, my ears work fine, Jonah. There's no need to yell. And Jameson's just like, then why didn't you answer? So Ben says, because you were yelling. And Jameson's like, yeah, but I only yell because you're old and I worry you can't hear. So Ben's like, what? And Jameson tells him, exactly. And it's just a really nice way to show how close and candid the 2 of these guys are. And we find out the reason why Jameson came in here so worked up is because they got a really important meeting at 4, and the financing wants both Jonah and Ben to be there. But Ben has somewhere really important that he needs to be today. So Jonah's just more or less like, say the word, and I'll do what I can to move the meeting back, just out of consideration for Ben. But in response, Ben just assures Jonah that it's not a problem and he'll be back for the meeting. And it's right here where Peter walks in. though like we've seen, he's been here, and Jonah knows that, but it lends for the opportunity for Jonah and Ben to kind of tease Peter for a little bit just before Peter and Ben head out. And as they leave, Ben assures Jonah that he'll be back by 4 for that meeting. But before they go, Jameson stops Peter for a second. And I gotta say, between this moment and the one that follows, they both give us a glimpse into the significant roles that Jonah and Ben play in Peter's life. Cause right here where Jameson stops Peter, he's like, "Where's your tie?" And Peter's more or less like, "I don't wear one. I don't even think I own one." So because of where Ben and Peter are going, Jameson tells Peter, "You have to wear a tie. Take your jacket off." As he takes off his tie and he ties it on Peter for him. And to me, this right here is just a huge moment, because as a man, it's important that we learn things from other men. And it reminds me about a friend I had growing up. His name is James, and we're about the same age, but my friend James is the one who taught me how to tie a tie. He taught me that I should open a door for a woman, and these were things that I held on to for life, because my dad's always been a blue-collar guy, so he never really knew to pass these things down. And my friend James, though he grew up with a single mother, he learned these things from other men in the church who passed it on to him, and he passed it on to me. And it just makes me think of how in this case with Peter, since he didn't have his biological parents in the picture and his actual father around to teach him these things, Jameson notices this, so he steps in and he helps Peter out by loaning him the tie off of his own neck. But as he's getting it ready for Peter, he takes this opportunity to have a little talk with him. And he tells Peter, "Your uncle is the toughest son of a gun I've ever met." Asking if he's okay is kind of like asking about the durability of stone or some geological remnant of time. Saying that, how about you and I, regardless of how it appears he's doing, keep a close lookout for any cracks we might see. Can we agree to that, Peter? So Peter tells him yeah. And Jameson goes on to say, if you really want to know how your uncle's doing, you could always just ask. And before Peter goes, Jameson reminds him that that tie is just a loaner. He gonna need that back. To where from here, where we now go with Peter and Ben, we see a conversation that tells us so much more about the two of them. Because when Peter tells him, "Everyone's wondering if you're doing okay," and Uncle Ben is just like, "Everyone's not wondering if I'm okay, Peter. Everyone doesn't care. We work at the Bugle, so you and me, we're in the words business. If there's something you want to say, don't hide your intent. Just go ahead and say it. Then everyone will respect you more because you did." So then Peter's like, "Alright, fair. I'm worried about you. You haven't said anything, not a word about how you're doing or how you feel." So Ben tells him, "Peter, you were 15 when your parents died, and you came to live with May and I. That first year was hard for you. Heck, it was hard for all of us. But we loved you unconditionally. We protected you. I tried to teach you about the world and prepare you for it, while May was better at all this kind of stuff. But the one thing we never tried to do was replace your parents, because we couldn't. Now that was 20 years ago. It's been a long time, but has one day gone by that you didn't think about them? Is there one day that it doesn't hurt that they're gone?" And Peter tells him no, and Uncle Ben says, "Then you know exactly how I feel." Cause right now the two of them had just made their way to Aunt May's funeral, which for Peter, this is the first thing I was referring to as far as what was on his mind. But also this is a huge ceremony, because it's being held for all of the victims of the Illuminati attack that we saw at the end of Ultimate Universe, where the Illuminati spun the whole story on this attack to make it seem like it was done by Tony. And it was a story that wasn't too hard for them to sell, since the Illuminati used a Stark satellite to pull off this attack. And the names we see here at the memorial, they're the same ones we were shown on the news broadcast that were scrolling across the screen, listing the names of those people who are said to have been in the area of the Stark Stain headquarters when the attack happened. And if you guys remember, the reporter who was speaking on this a week later, he mentioned thousands remain missing. So to make this list of names, international agencies combined the use of GPS, digital IDs, and other forensic data in order to create this list, under the assumption that none of them could have survived, based on them being within the blast area at the time of impact. So coming back to the ceremony, they're all presumed dead, including Tony Stark. And going forward, we find that Matt Murdock is a priest, who's here giving words of encouragement just before the last speaker takes the podium. And when that last speaker steps up, it's Harry Osborn. And for Harry, he lost both of his parents in this attack, both Norman and Emily Osborn. But when he gives his speech, he talks about the good memories he had with his dad, who at times made Harry feel like he was the most important person in the world. But going forward, now that his parents are gone, he won't have moments like those anymore. And as he closes out, Harry ends on a note that is not as encouraging as Father Murdoch's, because you can see the expression of anger on his face as he tells everyone there our future was stolen from us, and all we got in exchange were memories. It's just not enough. and I'm not sure any of us should be expected to live with it. And after that, with Harry being the last speaker, MJ's just like, well, like that was intense. But no, she tells Peter except for that bit at the end, she thought that went as well as possible. And after this, MJ takes the kids home while Peter and Ben make their way back to the Bugle for the meeting. And as soon as they get back, as they're walking in, they can see J. Jonah Jameson in the conference room, throwing papers and storming out. And as soon as that door opens, he's like, I quit. And Jonah just grabs his stuff and heads to the elevator. So Ben tells Peter to go to his desk, keep his head down, and they'll catch up later. And when Ben goes into the conference room, he's just like, so did I miss something? And he's brought up to speed by Robbie Robertson, who tells him they've been informed that there's going to be some editorial restructuring at the paper. Jonah didn't like these changes, and that's why he stormed out. So Ben asks Robbie how does he feel about it, and Robbie tells him that he's just 2 years from maxing out his pension, so he feels like it's a good idea, which is really him just being straightforward with Ben. So Ben, he can respect that, though he doesn't agree with it. And mind you, in this case, we're dealing with a very different Robbie Robertson than the one we know from Earth 616, who would have taken more of a stance in this situation. But I imagine because this series is going for more of that modern realism, we're seeing this Robbie make a very real decision. But from here, Ben asks what exactly these changes are. So Robbie tells him they've gotten a number of complaints from their advertisers who weren't happy about the Bugle's coverage on the Stark terror attack, and the advertisers expressed that they don't care for the direction that the Bugle's been taking on it recently. So you can just imagine how that's put the Bugle in a tough spot, because the advertisers, they keep the lights on, and if they're not rocking with the Bugle, then it's not gonna last long. So Robbie goes on to tell Ben that they had to make some changes at the behest of the board and broader ownership in general, as we're shown that this broader ownership is Wilson Fisk, the Kingpin. And already the Kingpin is offering Ben Jameson's former job while the seat's still warm. So Ben just gives him this look like, you gotta be kidding me, just before he goes on to join Jameson in the elevator. And he asks him, so what are we gonna do now? And later on, we're shown for a brief moment as the Kingpin stepping out of his vehicle, he's attacked and nearly killed by this world's version of the Green Goblin, where in his case, I'd be surprised and a little bit disappointed if it was anyone other than Harry Osborn, because I'm really interested in learning more about a number of things with him, because his suit seems to be a collaboration between his father, Norman Osborn, who perhaps at some point was working with Howard Stark, because if that's the case, not only could it make for some interesting backstory on how this technology came about, but it could also add on to what I think is going to be a very interesting dynamic between Harry, Peter, and Tony. But from here, next we head over to the bar with no name, where we find Jonah and Ben talking about their next move. And really for the most part, it's Uncle Ben pitching the idea of them starting their own news outlet and doing it right. So at first, Jonah tells Ben that sounds like the definition of insanity. What's going to be different between what we were doing and whatever this is? So Ben tells him this time they'll do it right, and they'll just tell the truth. So Jameson pauses for a minute and he's like, the truth? And then he just busts out laughing with that signature J. Jonah Jameson laugh that's guaranteed to turn every head in the establishment. And he more or less goes on to tell Ben that there's one thing he knows for sure, and that's there's no truth in the news and there's no news in the truth. Because Jameson's been doing this for 30 years and he knows that it's a dirty business and just telling the truth isn't gonna cut it. So he looks at Ben and he's like, how about this? We promise not to lie, which I think is a great foundation, because it'll leave them open to however they want to deliver a story. And it's around this time when Peter shows up. And really in his case, he's come here to check on these guys and see if Ben's okay. So they end up telling Peter about their new endeavor. And they even go as far as to offer Peter a job at their new startup. And the first thing Peter asks is, do you have any money? Because for Peter, of course, he's got a wife and 2 kids at home. But even if that wasn't the case, if you're younger or middle-aged, paying bills out of your pocket for an unknown length of time, that's a countdown to homelessness. So Jameson just tells Peter that's a day 2 problem. And he more or less calls it a night, leaving Peter and Ben at the bar. And now with the 2 of them alone, Peter's just like, Ben, I gotta know, how'd you do it? How do you blow up your whole life in one afternoon and then just start a new one? Which for Ben, his situation's a lot different than Peter's. And he lays it out for him. He tells him, Peter, my wife is dead. You're a grown man and have a family of your own. And given the opportunity, I just couldn't take being in an industry of compromise 1 minute more. Which again, for Ben, he's older, so he likely has more put away. It's only him. So for Ben, it's an easy choice, versus someone like Peter, who's middle-aged with a family and not much to fall back on without a job. But as it stands, Peter's gotten the answer that he was looking for from Uncle Ben, as far as the why and the how. But not long after, Ben turns this around, and he asks Peter what's going on with him. Are there problems at home? Is there something going on with MJ? And Peter's just like, no, we're great. Well, she's great. Because Peter thinks she deserves better than him, but she disagrees, which makes it even better. Because if she did agree, woo, that's a whole nother conversation. But it's nothing like that for Peter. So Peter tells him, it's just for the longest time I thought there's something wrong with my life, Ben. That something was wrong with me. I can't really explain it, but now I know that I've been right all along, and I don't know what to do. Which, for a reference, this is the second thing that kept Peter up all night, and though he's not giving Ben the details, he's just telling him in a more general sense. So Ben asks him if Peter's ever heard the saying, inaction is action. And Peter's like, yeah, sure. Ben tells him that's a garbage of a saying. Don't spend your life waiting for something to happen. Make it happen. And if Peter feels like he's been living his life half asleep, then he should wake up. Which from here takes us back to Peter's home, where we see him putting the kids to bed and shortly after making his way to MJ to have that conversation they talked about this morning, in addition to the update that came later with Jonah and Ben quitting the Bugle. So they kind of go in reverse with the topics, because they start with the Bugle and then they talk about the memorial for a moment, but MJ wants to get down to what's bothering Peter underneath all this. So he more or less gives her a generalization of it, kind of like he did with Ben, by telling her that he thinks he needs a change. And at first MJ thinks he's talking about a change in career. And then he's like, no MJ, I think I need to change. And right there, she's like, oh, that. So Peter asks her like, wait, what do you mean that? And as it turns out, MJ's known for a while that aside from Peter being a great husband and a great father, there's been this cloud hanging over his head. And sure, he puts on a good face every day, but she knows that he's not satisfied with who he is. So she asks him, do you know what you have to do? And he tells her, I think so. Yes. And with the slightest bit of fear, she asks him, are things going to change between us? And he tells her, never. So she jumps up and she's like, well then, that settles it. I'm going to bed. And you? Go get him, Tiger. And I gotta say, this conversation with MJ, it's just one of the reasons why I love this issue so much. Because if any of you guys have ever had the chance to read The Way of the Superior Man by David Data, it focuses on a man who is purpose-driven in the pursuit of his truth, and how your partner and your family will already know whether or not you're already living in that truth. Like, man, it's good. And there's so many parts of Peter's story, this version of Peter's story, that fall in line with it so perfectly. It's amazing. But after Peter's talk with MJ, he goes back in his bag, he grabs that shiny orb, and he makes his way to the roof. And as this happens, it's here where we're taken to the night before, when he received this mysterious glowing box that kept saying this is for Peter Parker, just before showing him a message from Tony Stark, Iron Lad, with it saying, if this has gone as I had hoped, I am speaking with Peter Parker. My name is Tony Stark, and while it's likely you know my father's name, you probably never heard of me. Which right there has Peter like, well, everybody knows who you are after what you did. But the message goes on to say, I'm sending you this from 6 months into the future. There was an attempt on my and my companions' lives, and we only had seconds to escape before the orbital platform fired. So we went to the only safe place I could think of, which now, as you can imagine, this is blowing Peter's mind, because not only is all the public information a lie, but also this guy Tony's talking about time travel. It's a lot to take in at one time. So the box opens, revealing the orb as the message continues, and Tony tells Peter inside there's a Picotech stealth suit to mask your identity, along with a bioorganic catalyst for you to undergo a post-human transformation. And Tony goes on to explain to Peter how 20 years ago, he was supposed to be bitten by a radioactive spider and become one of Earth's most prominent heroes, and how a great evil has undone the history for a number of others, much like him. As the message goes on to say, you are supposed to have a different life, Peter Parker. You are supposed to protect the innocent, save lives, and inspire citizens of this world to be their best selves. And instead, all of that was taken from you. To where, jumping forward to now, Peter remembers the rest of this message saying, these people stole your future. These people robbed you of your destiny. The question is, do you want it back? As Peter opens the orb and it releases 2 items, a black ball and a vial containing a radioactive spider. So Peter places it on his hand and he undergoes his transformation, which, yeah, man, I'm so excited for this series, because by design, Spider-Man was created to be a teenage superhero who appealed to kids with teenage problems, because at the time in the early 60s, outside of sidekicks, that had never really been done before. So now to see a middle-aged Peter begin his journey in this way, in this world, this story is showing some serious potential, especially when you think about the Tony Stark of this world, who's going to need someone to lead the way on fixing his story, with the world believing he's a terrorist and all that. And I think it's something that only Spider-Man could do. And I mean, of course, with the exception of Harry Osborn, because he's in a dark place, and I'm not sure if Harry cares for any other story except for his own. And so now real quick, I want to give a special shout out to all the patrons. Thank you guys for all of your support. And for anyone who's new here, who wants more information on how to support the channel, I got a link below where you can go to patreon.com/DopeSpill. But that'll do it for this one, guys. Let me know your thoughts down in the comments below, and we'll do it again on the next one. Alright, later.